They said it's not going to be if you know somebody that passes away from COVID-19, it's going to be when.
And the information seemed to just sort of be kind of speeding up, and it seemed like every time you made a decision, something changed.
That's when I knew that this pandemic was not just something we read in global newspapers, but something that each and every community would deal with.
We did not expect a pandemic of this nature.
We had to shut the state down in March.
I don't know if we'll ever reopen. Who knows what's going to happen? It was so unknown what was coming next. So that's a lot to process.
I was just so weak, I couldn't get out of bed. They had to use a Hoyer.
I had pneumonia, loss of sense of smell and taste, and headaches.
I think that Addison County was as ready as any county in the state, and no county was ready.
Every measure that we imposed, we were late. We were always late, and so yeah, it was there before us the whole time.
So things were moving very, very quickly. So I wouldn't say we were freaking out, but it was a stressful time, and it was a time we put in a lot of hours. I mean, I would say that it was, people talk about 24/7, and it's never really 24/7. That's the close I've ever come to 24/7. Between the second and third week of January, we started actually working with our staff in China, trying to understand what was going on. Yeah, so we had some of our students that were, like you said, there from early January for a language program.
I mean, things were absolutely perfectly normal. We went to class. We lived in a dorm, nearby, and it was really on the final week of the program, leading up to our final exams, when we started to realize that this could be a larger problem. On January the 20th and the 21st. I remember people started to buy masks, and at the local grocery store, I went out to buy them. I didn't really understand, no one really understood why they were buying them and all that kind of stuff. But I bought one, and I bought the last one off the shelf. January 20th to 21st was when human-to-human transmission was officially confirmed by the Chinese.
So we were really concerned that if students had to leave, they would not be able to because international flights would be restricted or the airports would be closed.
The university, Capital Normal University, that we were staying at, were begun to restrict our travel, and they basically created this kind of barricade around the campus. You would kind of have to ask permission every time you went in now, whether that was to grab meals or do anything.
It was still early here, so that some of those students, some Middlebury students and some non-Middlebury students could actually come back and go to their home schools here in the United States. If we waited much longer, we would not be able to do that.
I woke up on the 28th of January, and Middlebury suspended its program later that day. And then students basically were instructed to, leave China within the next couple days. And as those 3 days got on, I think the restrictions in the university place were getting even more restrictive. I think the first days, we could go out, we went out for dinner. But as we got on, takeout was our only option, and the delivery driver would kind of have to deliver it to the gate of the university that we were in, and pass it over to us. We were closely monitoring what the experience was like on the departure. You had to fill out a form, you had to get your temperature checked, you have to wear a mask in the airport, and everyone did on the plane, even though there was no official mandate, but everyone really did. And so on the Chinese side, we checked in, temperature was checked, you went through security, you filled out a health declaration form that said you didn't go to Wuhan in the past 14 days. When this was happening in China, I didn't expect that to happen. But, we were seeing in February reports of Italy, reports in other European countries.
There was an outbreak in the northern regions of Italy, and we have one of our small programs that is in one of those areas. It's a very small program. I think we only had maybe 1 or 2 students there. And we were looking at all reports saying Rome and Florence seemed to be okay. And I think maybe a week after that, the CDC increased its advisory level, and we pretty quickly decided that those students had to come back right away. And things moved pretty quickly after that.
To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. These restrictions will be adjusted subject to conditions of the order. There will be exemptions for Americans who have undergone appropriate screenings, and these prohibitions will not only apply to the International Trade Program, but various other things as we get
I just had this sneaking suspicion as schools began to close that it might be a good idea to get back to the States. And I actually left my program before it was formally shut down. I actually came back with a Columbia University student. So her and I left Jordan and flew into JFK. And by the time that we had touched down at JFK, we had received over 400 group messages that were related to our study abroad program about how they were shutting down and had to evacuate Jordan immediately, as there was going to be a military enforced lockdown within 72 hours.
I was in Botswana, and we were in the bush at a campsite just miles and miles from the nearest town. And we were getting breakfast one morning, and our instructors had been off on their own talking and making phone calls, and they came back, and we just all knew something was up. And a lot of us didn't know, but one of the students was like, "Our program's canceled, isn't it?" And they just didn't respond.
In some of the other countries, when we ask the students to leave, they seem to have a few days to make that happen. The airport in Morocco just closed, so it had to happen very, very quickly. And that was not going to be enough time for our students to be able to change their flight. So we had to book new flights for all of them. So
it was such a weird feeling to know that we were going to the U.S. where cases were rising out of control.
And I believe the first case in Vermont was in early March 2nd perhaps, on the eastern side near White River Junction. The first time that I heard a briefing about it was actually, I believe it was March 10th. And there was a full briefing by the governor's team for the legislature. It was in the well of the House, and I remember listening to it, and it was actually, as I was listening to that briefing, I got a text saying that Middlebury College had decided to send its students home.
I think it was becoming clear that this was going to be the dominant trend for universities in March.
I was in Molly Anderson's Food Power Justice class in the Chateau. I'm sure it'll be a vivid memory for the rest of my life when one of my classmates walked in, pulled out her laptop, and mentioned the Hector Villa email in front of everyone.
I first learned that the college was sending students home when I was teaching my senior seminar class. One of the students got this email saying that this was likely going to happen, and pretty much everyone in my class, we all learned at the same time.
The campus was like, I would say, a little bit frantic and also absent-minded. People were pretty absent-minded in class, I would say. But for seniors like us, knowing that a lot of friends will be gone and probably would not come back for a while, we probably just jumped straight into senior week mode, if you know what I mean.
Our local editor, Ben Glass, wrote a story about Bevco, the local discount beverage supplier, basically just selling out of all their beverages within, a couple of hours. And that was, to date, I think one of the best, funniest stories we've ever run.
Maybe as early as 2 p.m. after like the 1:30 email, I was bombarded with GroupMe texts saying, we're meeting at this time tonight, here's our plan, we're going to cram this all in, and every night was another event. And even during the day, I think a lot of upperclassmen were trying to rush with popular senior events that usually take place during senior week. It was anarchy. Campus was complete chaos. Everyone was in the worst headspace possible, but pushing through it to enjoy the last few days with their friends.
I went to a sunrise viewing with my friends at the football field. When the sun came out and we were snuggled together in a blanket, and for some reason it felt like a ritual where it's telling us that this is over.
Middlebury came up with the slogan box, label, and leave. And so we were boxing all of our things. We were going to label them with our name and our room numbers, and then we were going to leave them. I think it was a mess. I remember that there were these trucks that would pull up to campus with our great facilities workers coming with all these boxes. We managed to order, I forgot who it was from Lowe's or one of those supply companies. We ordered like thousands of boxes that came to Middlebury, and it was kind of like this humanitarian effort, I felt like.
I did the worst packing job I could have possibly done. I threw random items in random boxes and hoped for the best.
I think at that time, a lot of international friends and we were gathering together, kind of discuss what we're going to do. And our first instinct was, how can we convince the school to let us stay for as long as we can?
I remember like myself being kind of worried about students because, at the time I was like, well, it doesn't seem to be spreading that fast in Vermont. And, at the time, New York was kind of like one of the big epicenters. So I was thinking to myself, what's going to happen to the students if we're sending them out of Vermont to all these places where, the virus is spreading and so on?
I think that it was a tense 3 or 4 days after that decision, because I think folks didn't really understand the true nature of the pandemic. And then over time, even a week later, I was getting letters going, oh my God, I see this now.
We look at how the response to this was handled. There was no playbook for this. We prepare for all kinds of wacky things. We prepare for these massive hazardous materials events, things that you would expect to happen day to day. We did not expect a pandemic of this nature.
We started getting updates on COVID-19 back in January. So we began a long-term planning process, understanding that this is coming whether we like it or not. So we began doing an inventory of our protective equipment and things we might need and try to get up to speed to deal with this. Everything from interim scheduling for employees and how we're going to protect the building. So we started a planning process probably in the end of January. One of the things the college did was take one of the buildings that were closed. They sanitized it, and we used it as a home for nurses working at the nursing home so we could keep them apart so they wouldn't be bringing diseases into the nursing home where you have a very vulnerable population. We also have made arrangements to use some of their larger structures in the event we had a medical surge. So they were an important partner in this whole planning process.
We had completely insufficient testing, which we still have insufficient testing nationwide. We did not have access to PPE and the medical supplies that we needed. People didn't have masks. Medical people didn't have masks, didn't have gloves, didn't have gowns, didn't have respirators. So a lot of what the state did at the very beginning is they did anything they possibly could to procure supplies. The state National Guard worked to build facilities. They built several facilities that were overflow facilities in case we needed them in the depths of the crisis in March and April and May. Unfortunately, we did not need them, but they were there, up and ready in case we did. And I think part of it is because in Vermont, we've worked so well together. This has not been a partisan response. We have a Republican governor and an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature, and we've all worked super well together.
I think Phil Scott and the Vermont government have done a really fantastic job with handling COVID-19. We have just one of the best curves in the country because we did spike, but then we went immediately down, and we've had an extremely low case rate that's been pretty consistently low.
The federal government response has been just like a complete shambles. They have not had a response, right? Like, what is the federal response? All Trump has done so far is say, let's leave it up to the states, right? Like, the dude just started wearing a mask last week. You know what I mean? Like, we've been, and prior to that, he was talking about, masks don't help, coronavirus hoax, the Democrats this, Chinese flu that, it's going to disappear like magic. It's just been just a complete disaster.
The federal government's response to this pandemic has been absolutely inadequate. It's been embarrassing and dangerous. The reaction and performance of our president is absolutely criminal, and thousands of people have died because he has been irresponsible and because he has not done the duty of a leader in the midst of a crisis. The record in our country for this pandemic is worse than almost any country in the world, and it is horrible. And working with the federal government has been absolutely frustrating and sad, frankly.
We, in the Constitution, it's these United States, we the people of these United States, and for the president and for everybody to say, I remember Jared Kushner was saying, well, the federal stockpile isn't for the states, it's our stockpile. I said, well, who's our stockpile? Is it, DC can't have all those, ventilators, but I think we still haven't realized that a piecemeal approach and kind of a state-by-state approach of solving this is not going to work.
My county and my district has been really fortunate. We've had a low rate of infection, and on the individual level, many people are suffering, but on the macro level, our county is incredibly lucky. Our state is incredibly lucky.
To date, the aggregate number is 68. Our last confirmed case of COVID in Addison County was on June 23rd. We've had 2 deaths, elderly patients.
We had one of our local people here, long-time member of this community. He's a plumber. He's done services for so many people. Everybody knows him, and him and his wife are both well loved. And he got COVID pretty bad. He was in pretty bad. He's still in bad shape.
Can you just state your names?
Keith Madison.
And I'm Pat Madison.
And can I ask when you were first diagnosed with COVID-19?
Yeah, you can ask, but you'll have to ask my wife. I thought I was there a day. Does that tell you how my memory is from being in Porter? I don't remember a thing.
So we went into the hospital, and at that time, even then, it was, if you go to the hospital, you had to call from outside, use the emergency room entrance, and they would come out to you. And they came out, by that time, he really wasn't able to, he was too weak to walk. I had gone home, said I'll be back in a couple of hours, thinking that I'd pick you up then. And he texted me a couple hours later saying, take your time, I'm gonna get a room. That was the longest statement he made for the next month. The hospitalist called and she says, so we're going to have to put an airway in, and that means Burlington. But they extubated on like a week after he went on. Well, they found out after, as they were going to, after several days, well, they were referring to it as complete organ failure. And his kidneys had really crashed and burned, so to speak. I've had 4 positive tests. So the only thing we know is I really did have it. The only thing I had pneumonia, loss of sense of smell and taste, and headaches. Never had a fever. I was able to keep working. So I was okay. The doctor was treating me for that, and
Yeah, but you didn't get much sleep for 3 weeks either while I was.
no. I knew that somebody died when he was there. Somebody around his age. So I certainly knew that was a possibility. But it was not entering into my consideration. And I made that pretty clear. And Dr. McKenna came out and said, I wish I could give you a hug. And I said, yeah, well, you really don't want to do that. You know, and I felt bad because I should have done something sooner. A week he's been sick. I should have just dragged his butt in there and dumped it in the emergency room and say, fix him. And she said, you know what? It wouldn't have made a bit of difference, because what happened today was not what was going on yesterday.
We couldn't contact trace in hindsight. We probably were involved in spreading the infection. Actually, we were in Hawaii. We had been planning for 2 years, and my son, we flew through Newark. It was mid-February, and it was Valentine's Day when we flew through Newark. And we remember there were several Europeans around us on the plane that were coughing and sneezing. We got to Hawaii, and the next day my son became ill, very ill, and was hospitalized, and we were freaking out. The chest x-rays were unlike anything they had ever seen. He was isolated to our room. He didn't leave our hotel room for 2 weeks except to go to the hospital. We were all extremely careful, hand washing, hand sanitizer, but we weren't wearing masks. He was diagnosed with pneumonia, but then the doctors couldn't figure out what else was wrong with him. And they didn't test for COVID, but in hindsight, as we've done some sort of type like forensic research, so to speak, it's very clear that it was COVID due to a variety of issues. My daughter got it the day we got home, my wife got it, and then I came down with it a little bit later. Our son was knocked out for a couple of weeks, daughter everyone was about 2 weeks. My wife and I had it less severely, but it held on longer. So we had that like dry cough they talk about, and just couldn't shake it, crushing fatigue, dry cough. So it was intense. We were actually very concerned that we were gonna be stuck there. We legitimately wondered, will mainland United States close, and will we be able to get home? So it was kind of surreal. We were worried about our daughter, who's younger. Should one parent take her home? And I think, sometimes when you're in the middle of it on a day in, day out basis, we were focused on a bit of a narrow view of just simply focusing on our child's health. It was sort of like a surreal out-of-body experience watching this global situation dropping like nighttime. I can no longer guarantee the safety of my staff. I don't want to endanger anyone in the town. I've built the Marquee as a community center to bring people together, and it became very clear that the responsible thing to do was not bring people together.
Yeah, so when we had to shut the state down in March, many businesses were closed. They were required to close, schools were required to close, and so in addition to the onus of a global pandemic and a medical emergency, we immediately had an economic crisis on our hands as well. Thousands and thousands of Vermonters were laid off and suddenly were unemployed, and our unemployment rate spiked.
The unemployment rate reached 15% the last few months. Right now, this recession is worse than the Great Recession, and it's the worst recession we've seen since the Great Depression.
Right now, the best numbers that I've heard from a fellow business owner in town here are numbers down 50%. That's the best. Most are down more than that.
So the AAUP, Association of American University Professionals, really kind of took off this semester on campus, in large part because of concerns about finances, financial compensation, faculty and staff salaries, and so on, that we're probably going to take a hit because we're refunding students. Some students aren't going to come back. We're going to have questions about enrollment and so on.
So we were concerned for the unknown. I was concerned for my staff. I wanted to be sure that everyone would have a job to come back to, including myself. I mean, many people live paycheck to paycheck, including myself. I'm a single parent, so I needed to know that I had something as well. I do have to say that the college really did step up, and they committed to pay everyone through the end of June.
I used to work at Middlebury College, and they furloughed me the 13th of March. I was kind of scared because I didn't know how I was going to be able to get money and pay for my gas.
In normal mode, we're volunteer based. We have about 1,200 volunteers, and we provide food for those who are food insecure and housing for those who are homeless or in precariously difficult situations. I can't remember the exact date, but I remember going for a long walk on a Friday afternoon, weighing all the things that I was seeing around me and all the things I was hearing on the news, and just came to the decision that we could not safely house people in Charterhouse anymore because in a congregate setting you just can't have the spacing that you need. And so we went to our board, and overnight they agreed that we needed to transfer everybody to motel rooms where they had the option of being isolated in a room rather than being in the congregate setting. So since that time, a lot more people who were homeless in this area and living in precarious situations came out of the woodwork, people we didn't even know were homeless. And so we ended up with over 100 people in motels in the area. The state took over the cost of that, fortunately.
But our goal was to have nobody homeless. We wanted people to have a home to go to so they could stay safe and stay home, which was what the governor was really urging people to do. But we did less of a good job of beefing up our economic response to individuals losing their job. So people had to wait weeks and weeks to get benefits, to get their unemployment insurance. So a lot of my time in April in particular, but still, is assisting constituents with getting access to unemployment insurance and getting access to the economic relief packages that are available to individuals and businesses.
There is a very small time window where international students are allowed to be unemployed. So if I'm ever unemployed for over 90 days, if my company decides to lay me off, I will lose my legal status in the state.
Because I work in a school system, I carry the insurance. At this point, everything COVID related is supposed to be covered. The only thing we had a couple of, because the discharge did not go as it was supposed to, I've had to buy some things that they were supposed to have given him. One of the bills was $160,000.
$65,000.
$165,000. That was just one of the UVM bills. The
ambulance was $3,500.
So those, that's, we haven't even seen anything.
That wasn't
on,
even including Porter. Porter was another $20,000.
The senator from Chittenden has moved that the Senate suspend its rules in order to messenger action taken on S-342, an act relating to temporary workers' compensation amendments related to COVID-19 to the governor forthwith. Are you ready for the question? If so, please unmute your microphones. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
If there's no further debate, the question is on the passage of the bill as amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill as amended is passed.
The chair will count for a quorum. Counted for a quorum is present. The motion is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Section 7B of House Resolution 891, the House stands adjourned until 3 p.m. on Tuesday, March 31st, 2020.
So I did receive a grant a couple of weeks ago, which will help us survive an extended closure.
And so there is funding available now, and we actually just submitted a grant proposal yesterday to help us make some major modifications to the building that will provide isolated air for each individual where they sleep. There'll be some separation with some curtains.
But we just appropriated $85 million for housing programs in the state through our federal relief funds. And what we're hoping to do with that is we put some toward renovating shovel-ready projects that could renovate buildings that are able to house people. Some is for rental assistance or mortgage assistance to help people with their back payments so that they don't get evicted or foreclosed upon. And some is to provide legal and housing assistance to people who need to get in a better position so that they can be housed. Hospitals in this pandemic have been put in a really difficult position.
A lot of our smaller rural hospitals have been financially fragile for years. And so the strain of a pandemic where they are, where there's an increased amount of pressure put on those institutions to react to a global health crisis, but also a restriction on the other medical services they can provide. So they were not allowed to provide sort of routine care or voluntary surgeries or things like that during the depths of the pandemic. So they actually ended up losing a lot of revenue, a lot of business. We just appropriated $275 million as part of a reaction to stabilize our medical providers. And that is in addition to the original money that was provided to hospitals to help fund the emergency things that they had to do. The legislature's put aside $150 million for school districts. We have already appropriated $50 million of it for reimbursement of funds for things like buying the extra Chromebooks and doing the things that they needed to do for remote learning in the spring.
I know that colleges are under an enormous amount of financial stress. And whether they're public colleges like UVM and the state colleges or wealthy private colleges like Middlebury College.
We did have a few staff. We asked people if they wanted to remain working or if they, we gave them the option. We wanted everybody to feel safe.
I am hoping to start work again in August or September. I think I would be financially stable by then.
So fortunately, the college is increasing its normal draw on the endowment. I think the standard is supposed to be like 5% or something like that. And I think, I forget what percent, like 10 or 12, somewhere in that region. So what I would like them to focus on primarily is staff compensation, faculty compensation, and, to a lesser extent, administrative compensation, because they get paid a lot, all right?
It's an interesting thing because as you just saw, what a public conversation about endowment is it's not a bank account, right? It's a trust. It has very specific reasons for existing. Many of those funds have specific entailments. And that means that even though we can claim that wonderful endowment, it also is not something that we can use. We can create reserves, and that's what is in danger of being depleted. We're designing our budget one quarter at a time, right? So, and we've never done that before. We've never had any kind of situation where it's literally been quarter by quarter that we have to assess, where we are and so forth. The wage continuity was an important piece for us from the beginning. We feel really good about the fact that we've been able to do that. I think the ways and the decisions that we made around doing much more operational cuts and drawing a little bit more from the endowment, those were, nobody was perfectly happy with any of those decisions. The fiscal conservatives would say, as many other colleges did with much larger endowments than ours, yeah, we're going to be doing, a freeze on benefits or a freeze on wages or, however we furloughing people or laying people off. We chose not to do that. The squeeze that we are feeling and will continue to feel will be the choice for the operational cuts.
They sent all the students home. It became clear that we were going to have to do online teaching because what else are you going to do, right? The paid tuition and everything was like almost halfway through the semester. So I don't know that I felt prepared because as I, found out or as I discovered when I was transitioning over to making everything online, it's very different.
Online teaching for me was definitely a bit of an adjustment. There was the 2-week spring break, and where I revamped my course and then communicated with my students how things would go forward. And I hadn't really heard from my students. I was worried about them. They were figuring out what life was going to be like for the next few months.
Overall, I think online learning is a viable substitute to in-person learning when nothing works out. But I think online learning really requires both the professor and students to be very conscious and proactive in maintaining interactions similar to in-person classrooms. I think it's definitely harder for students to retain materials and communicate with professors.
It was hard to find a quiet space with my 2 siblings and my working parent and everyone being under the same roof. And I get distracted easily with noise, and I really like to study in Davis or other quiet spaces on campus, so I found that it took longer to do work. It was frustrating.
It's not fair to charge the same for online learning as in-person learning because it is a totally different experience. And online learning, it is so much more challenging for the students to really soak in the information. You're not getting so many of the benefits of being on campus, just mental health benefits.
It was pretty rough, honestly. I mean, we had these in-person classes that I had 3 each day with my teachers, and they were only 30 minutes, so it seemed a bit pointless to me, honestly.
I was dealing with some students who didn't have access to the reliable Wi-Fi. I was dealing with some students who, I had a few students who had to work to help with food on the table. I had some students who were taking care of family members, some students whose family members got sick with COVID-19, one student who had family members die from COVID-19. So, again, I didn't really expect that it would be possible to have discussion sections kind of all at the same time. Everybody's dialed in, everybody's done the work.
I think naturally when you choose a program like that and it's forced to go online, it sucks. I think a lot of my peers lost interest in a lot of the course material, and I did too, to a certain extent. I was kind of just waiting for the program to end.
I mean, spending time in front of a screen I had to buy the glasses that like protect from the blue light. Like it was just so bad. I had all these headaches.
And then there were many days that I was on Zoom for 10 hours straight, and I would just, one meeting would stop and I would have 2 minutes and I'd, run and grab a granola bar and drink water and go to the bathroom, and I'd be on another meeting. And those were really intense days.
When it's like that, when it's all day, 8-9 hours, and you're just at it the whole day, it's exhausting. You get to the end of the day and you're fried, you can't think.
Being in quarantine and spending a lot of time in front of screen can be a little upsetting sometimes, because usually in school, if you worked hard, you would get some kind of rewards of, being able to hang out with friends after, drink, or just enjoy each other's company. But I think being quarantined kind of deprives us from that privilege. Having to work, study, cook, and sleep on the same roof can really make somebody lose the sense of time. The days are passing really fast, and then it's really to go by a day without really accomplishing something you have planned.
I'm not working at home. I'm trying to get work done while I'm stuck at home.
I just live in this kind of small space, so I feel very claustrophobic, and so I feel the need to just get outside more as a result.
Going out in public right now, especially in Middlebury, I would say it's kind of a very ginger dance. It was always a kind of careful gaugement of how careful are you and how much risk do I want to take.
It's so weird. I mean, just like meeting people and not shaking hands or wearing masks, obviously.
Whenever I go out in public now, I'm kind of hyper vigilant, so I noticed that I've been doing this thing where if I go out and I see like a license plate, like an out of state license plate, I'm like cutting side eyes, I'm like, you need to get back to Idaho, take your coronavirus with you,
In the early stages of an emergency like this, when people are pretty much on lockdown or there's a general level of anxiety and fear, we see that manifest itself in interpersonal relationships in the home. There's just a lot of anxiety, and it drives a lot of these domestic problems that we see. We did see a slight uptick on child abuse type cases, not child sexual assault, but child abuse. We've seen an uptick in domestic violence and just general disturbances within the home.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges in all of this has been that the world continues to go and during a pandemic. And as you know, one of the major crises that we've had to deal with and react to and process during a global health crisis was the tragic murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis at the hands of a police officer.
Yeah, I attended a protest myself as well. I had a very interesting moment where I was at one of the Philadelphia protests here, the one that was televised in the national news circuit. And I had an experience with the National Guard, the police. My grandfather was a cop. I grew up admiring him, not necessarily for his status as a cop, but more for the idea that he wanted to quote unquote serve. And so I went to a protest and had a bit of a confrontation with the police in trying to kind of stand with some Black and brown folks. I had this really trippy moment of I was kneeling, and there were helicopters overhead. There was a team of SWAT agents. There was a team of National Guard members, the police. And I kind of looked around and I thought to myself, if my life had turned out a little bit differently, if I had made a different choice, it could have been me in that uniform.
Again, we go through COVID and the anxiety and stress levels are pretty high right now. And when you have incidents that really had nothing to do with us, that happened nationally, and in other words, like the George Floyd killing, that does affect us because there's a sense that all the police do the same things everywhere. And we have worked really hard, and I've been the chief here 29 years, I've been a policeman for 46, to kind of weed out that kind of mentality within the ranks with hiring and trying to stay above all that.
It's been startling, upsetting, and horrifying, right? In part because I just felt like, me personally, just increased my sense of vulnerability in the United States and in the world, right? Because not only are we dealing with a potentially virulent disease, now we're dealing with increasingly hard crackdowns. We're dealing with like physical expressions of white resentment against Black civil rights and minority civil rights.
And I feel like that definitely was a low point. Like just so many things at once weighing on us. But yeah, so we were like, it wasn't a senior prank because it wasn't supposed to be funny or whatever, but we did come together, and that was really, that was the first time I saw a lot of people from my class actually. It was kind of a weird combination of like really happy to see all these people, but also kind of like a somber occasion that we have to protest for these things. Honestly, this spring didn't really feel like high school. Like it just felt like doing classes, just random, like, you know. And there's definitely some things that like I definitely miss. Like the senior play would have been really fun to do. Obviously prom and graduation.
Mary Frances Nage Benson.
I mean, yeah, graduation is a big moment for people, and I do think it wasn't done, you know, to what it could have been, but it would have been nice to see my peers graduate as well. I only saw basically the people in front and behind me graduate.
Unlike graduation, felt like it didn't really happen. Sorry to be blunt. I appreciate the speech that President Lori Patton delivered, but it was so brief that it didn't really feel like a proper ritual. For me, it was just like a 15-minute distraction from my daily chores, so.
Yeah, it's affected. I canceled all my vacation, so there's no vacation till whenever, till this is done. I've missed birthdays. I've got 10 grandchildren. Can't go visit any of them for their birthday.
My son was scheduled to take his driver's license test and wasn't able to do so. He was scheduled for it late March. So he was pretty frustrated, but it's not like we could go anywhere.
My son is getting married in October. They just barely sent out their wedding invitations because they were waiting to see if they were going to be able to have their full rehearsal or not. He's getting married in upstate New York, but they were still waiting for official confirmation.
I got a phone call from one of my best friends who used to work at the college. It was her husband saying that his wife passed away suddenly. It hit me pretty hard. I wasn't ready for them to leave Earth yet. Because 3 days before that accident, I was talking to them.
I have lost a few family members and friends during the crisis, but not to COVID. And so it just feels a little weird too when somebody dies during a pandemic and they didn't die of the virus. I have had friends who have lost family members, parents, middle-aged people my age. I know several of my friends have lost their mothers in the crisis.
I do not have any immediate friends or family who contracted COVID. However, I do have friends, family who have unfortunately passed away due to COVID.
Yes, I've known several people that have had it.
I've known a few people.
Friends of my parents, other students.
A cousin of mine.
There's one acquaintance.
A couple students from Middlebury, distant relatives.
My cousin and her husband.
But we are a tiny state surrounded by a disaster, and it's only a matter of time before, it comes back here in some way. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are nervous about colleges reopening.
So the state of Vermont put out a college restart plan, and so every college has to meet the state requirements. And one of the ways that they allow students to quarantine is in a campus quarantine phase. So we are requiring all of our students to do a 14-day pre-arrival quarantine. The way the testing will work on arrival is students will go to Virtue Fieldhouse. And in Virtue, there will be it's our testing center. And so the tests that we have are actually self-administered. What you'll find is life will look quite different than it did when you left in March. So what that means is things are set up for physical distancing. So the best example I can give is the dining halls. Because this phase is restrictive, it will only be to go. So classrooms have all been reevaluated for a new capacity, and that new capacity ensures that we have physical distancing. The campus quarantine phase basically is designed to keep things small gatherings. So if students want to socialize, they can do that. But small groups, less than 10, always with face coverings, always with physical distancing. So if things are going well and health conditions in not only the state, but in the county and on campus are favorable, and students are following precautions, we'll be able to advance into what we would call phase 2. If things go well after a few weeks, we would advance into what we would call phase 3.
So one of the students said there's a introverted, this way of opening is good for introverts in a way that's very different than, for extroverts. As a friend of mine who was a head of a liberal arts and sciences college out on the West Coast, she said, if I had your data, I'd be opening too.
I do not trust 18 to 22-year-olds to social distance.
I remember when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, I probably didn't make all my best decisions.
You don't socialize, you don't go into town, you don't bring visitors into town, you don't go to other places, you don't, make out, you don't go to Atwater parties, right? There's no way that you can reasonably expect 18 to 20-year-olds to do all of that. Not all of them, right? I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be able to do that.
I trust myself and a lot of my peers to have a communitarian sense of belonging at Middlebury and appeal to their higher angels and say, I don't want something bad to happen to me or somebody that I know, or even to somebody that you don't know. And, the reality is if something happens, you might not even know it.
I go to school at Middlebury College. I started showing symptoms a week or so after I moved off of campus during, our evacuations. And that's when I started suffering with a severe shortness of breath, chills, muscular fatigue, dehydration, hallucinations to an extent, and just, overall severe dry cough as well. There's such a large margin of error, right, where I 100% could have been asymptomatic for a couple of days and then been onto campus and then the symptoms started to show. I mean, yeah, the general theory is a 2-week incubation period and then symptoms start showing up, right? That's the general theory. For some people, that period of time of asymptomatic transmission and shedding of the virus can be much longer. For some people, it's much shorter. So I can't say with the guarantee that I did not have it earlier on campus. I can't say with the guarantee I did not have it when people were moving in. What I can say with the guarantee is that 5 to 6 days after moving off of campus, I started exhibiting symptoms. I took an antibody test like 2 weeks ago, and I had an antibody. My mom also tested positive for antibodies, and she got ill after I interacted with her after I had come back from Middlebury. I know that when I came back home, I wasn't in contact with anyone, and I was quarantining in my house. My parents weren't going anywhere as well, and they were quarantining. So I had no contact with anyone after leaving Middlebury. So for me to exhibit those symptoms, my logical conclusion is, where did I last have contact with people? And that was Middlebury. I have read the Back to Campus guide. I think it's the best the college can do. I personally wish that we were being forced to quarantine for a longer period of time in Middlebury. I personally don't believe that 18 to 23-year-olds are up to the task of taking this as seriously as they should take it. I personally don't think Porter or Parton are capable of handling a small outbreak on campus, for the sole reason that Vermont, and specifically Middlebury, with, I forget the exact number, but the amount of senior citizen homes that it has, Middlebury's population is old, and our surrounding population is old. If there's a small outbreak on campus, the outbreak, it won't be contained onto campus. It will seep into town. It will seep into the people who live into town. And then you have people that are at very high risks given the statistics.
I mean, you can't fly directly to Vermont, directly to Middlebury from most places. So you're going to have people coming in, connecting flights. You're going to have people, if you're in New York, right, and you're trying to get to JFK, some people take the subway, right? If we don't have an outbreak among students at Middlebury, it's going to be a miracle.
There's science out there. There's information out there that colleges can use to better protect their communities, and they're just not doing it. And I understand colleges are in a terrible financial position nationwide right now, but if you want to do this right, if you want to do it, you have to do it right.
All institutions of higher education are under financial stress. And unfortunately, that financial stress is really impacting their decision to come back in the fall. They're tuition-driven institutions that really need to be open in order to be on solid financial ground. If you're going to bring students back from all over the country, we need to have robust initial and ongoing testing to make sure students are getting tested.
We need to employ as much empathy and outward thinking as we can in this circumstance, and act as though we have an autoimmune disorder. We should live with that fear even if we don't have that fear, because our neighbor may have that fear, and our classmates may have that fear. I definitely think there should be, a sense of peer-to-peer accountability, and I think, we should not be ashamed or afraid to call someone out.
Because Middlebury and our peers are going to ask a lot of us this semester. We're really going to be looking to students, student organizations, clubs, cultural orgs, etc., to also help us, form a vision of what that new normal is going to be. And it's going to be our hope that we can, help bring those plans, those dreams, those reimaginings into fruition.
I have faith in the Middlebury community. I think we're unique in the sense that we're all kind to one another, and I've never met someone at Middlebury who I don't enjoy having conversations with.
And so, if we frame it as, this is the thing that we're doing, this is as Middlebury students and as a community, this is what we're going to do. And I would love for a great article to be written about us, how we made it through the semester and we did well with it. I would love that. I would love to get to November and we could say, this is what we did. You know, and you know, we could write a book about it, kind of thing. You know, this is the way that we did it.
I would like to tell students who aren't taking this seriously that don't put yourself in a situation where you begin to start taking it seriously when you're intubated. Don't put yourself in a situation where you begin to take this seriously when someone you know or someone you love is in a hospital and you won't be able to see them because you're not allowed to go into a hospital. Don't begin to take this seriously when you're suffering with a lack of oxygen and unable to breathe. You know, begin to take this seriously now so that you don't have to face those horrific conditions. Begin to take this seriously now so that you can remain safe and you can do the things that you love and live your life. You know, this is a very small inconvenience for a lifetime of health. And if you want to put your life, your entire life in risk because you find wearing a mask inconvenience, or if you find 14 days of quarantine inconvenient, it's not worth it. It's only 14 days. This is only 1 year of your life. Just do what we're asked to do, and you know, we'll look back on this in 5 years, and we'll all be healthy, and we'll all be safe. This is just such a small part of our lives. We're all very young. We shouldn't, you know, seal our fates just because we're careless or apathetic right now. So take it seriously.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I honestly hope everyone's been doing well. It's been weird to think that I haven't seen a lot of middle grade classmates or peers or acquaintances or just even people that I see randomly on campus. I'm like, oh, I recognize you. I haven't seen them really since January. To begin, I hope everyone's doing well. The one thing that I do have some concerns about is how students are going to react to being in this new environment. My hope is that students have really, really thought about how different this is going to be. I think it's going to be challenging. My hope is that, you know, we don't, as a college, we don't only prioritize, you know, following guidelines and sticking to them and enforcing them. We can also prioritize ways in which we can gather together and come together. I was thinking the other day about the zeitgeist, right? And I always think it's crazy how many people say that they're lonely. Oh, I don't actually think it's crazy, because I too have experienced moments of loneliness as well. Why is it that we can all be together at a normal semester and still feel lonely? And when I look at this upcoming semester, I want to make sure that even in a ridiculous pandemic time, those numbers can go down. And I think those numbers only go down if we're willing to look at one another and say, like, I'm here to have vulnerable conversations with you. I'm here to protect you in this time of COVID-19, and I'm here to offer my care, my genuine and sincere care to you.
Maybe about 6 weeks into the quarantine and the lockdown, I just had this moment where I was looking at my other family members, you know, my wife, my 3 kids, and so on, and it just kind of clicked to me. I was like, dang, I ain't tired of you guys yet, right? Like, I like you guys still, you know what I mean?
The silver lining in this is to have, you know, we had a big scare in our family with the virus, and appreciating our health and time together, and doing our best to just enjoy each day.
I've always just worked in the past. I mean, I have done some things, but just taking that time for myself and my daughter has been the silver lining, I guess.
I think my happy moment was bringing you home. Yep. Even if you weren't dressed to go out dancing.
And I do have to ask, I heard you guys had a great granddaughter born who was in the
At the
hospital.
same time.
How was that?
Oh, it's
Great.
But she's wonderful, and she's happy, and they didn't name her Corona or anything like that.
Do you have any plans on what you might do when a second wave were to hit?
I really have not thought that far in the future. Yeah, I'm just kind of taking it one day at a time.
Well, I think, first of all, we've already hit a second wave right now in the South. Like a huge resurgence with more cases per day than we've seen yet. But I do foresee many future waves. Until we get a vaccine, it's just going to go up and down and up and down.
I have to think of the future in a scientific sense. And the data that I can see out there and the understanding that I see out there is not adequate to know what's going to happen. And there's lots of opinions, and unfortunately the political scene has polarized things in a way that it's hard to have a logical discussion. But I'm not saying I know anything right now because there's not enough information. The one thing we know is this thing's highly contagious, and we know that it's transmitted airborne more than any other way. And so we're trying to design what we do with that in mind to protect people as best we can for what's coming.